started right here in the city of Chicago. Now, there's another famous building here in Chicago with the name Wrigley, and that is Wrigley Field, where the Chicago Cubs play baseball, which is the second oldest stadium in Major League Baseball. It's a landmark. And this is what we kind of call the first building of Michigan Avenue, where the part closest to the river was built in 1921. The other part was built in 1924, because they built the DuSable Bridge right there in 1919, which really opened up the opportunity to expand north down Michigan Avenue. All right, go ahead and look off of the left side of the boat. You're going to see a tall building with the, looks like it has a wedding cake sitting on top of it. It's brown stone. That right there is the Jewelers Building. Now, the Jewelers Building gets its name, the Jewelers Building, because there used to be a lot of offices inside that building for the jewelry merchants that worked here in Chicago. In fact, there used to be a giant elevator in the middle of that building where you could drive your car onto the elevator and take yourself and your car up to the floor you're going to work on. This way, if you had jewels to load or unload, you could do it from the safety of your office instead of doing it from a dark parking lot somewhere. But as we come underneath this bridge, if everyone could go ahead and look at the top of the Jewelers Building, because that's my favorite part to talk about. The top of the Jewelers Building was a Stratosphere Lounge, which was the most upscale speakeasy in Chicago during Prohibition. Now, when you think about Chicago during Prohibition, of course you think about gangsters. And who's a gangster I always think about here in the city of Chicago? Al Capone supplied all illegal alcohol to the Stratosphere Lounge up there. It is now an art room, showing room for an architectural firm, actually. So as you come underneath this bridge, you can go ahead and look out to the right side of the boat. You'll see two tall buildings that look like giant corn cobs. In fact, sometimes in Chicago we call them the corn cobs. This is the Marina City, done by the architect Bridget Goldberg. Now, Bridget Goldberg believed that there was no right angles in nature, so there should be no right angles in architecture, which is why you get the circular shape to these buildings. Now, notice how they have their own marina. They got a restaurant nearby. They got a place you can do some basic shopping. He wanted to design a city within a city to motivate people to stay here in the city of Chicago instead of moving out to the suburbs like lots of people were doing during the 1950s and 60s. He believed that the heart of culture was near the center of a city, and that you shouldn't have people moving away from it. Now, when you consider all the problems that cities are facing due to urban sprawl, he was sort of a visionary when it came to that. Now, as we come underneath this bridge, go ahead and look off of the left side of the boat. You're going to see this gray stone building with gray tinted windows. This building right here is 77 West Wacker. Now, look at the top, bottom, and in between the windows. You're going to see column shapes and arch shapes, kind of like you'd see in an ancient Greek or Roman building. Now, when you incorporate the ancient Greek and Roman into your architecture, it becomes a style that we call neoclassic. Now, think about that word. Neo means new, classics refer to the ancient Greek and Roman era of history. So it's really was combining a little bit of the old with the new. Now, it's also postmodern buildings. Neoclassic architecture sort of died out in the 30s. So that building was built in 1993. It was sort of paying tribute to that neoclassic era of architecture. Now, go ahead and look on the right side of the boat. You're going to see the Reed Murdoch Center, completed in 1913. This is a great example of something that we call adaptive reuse. And what that is a fancy way of saying we took a building that was used for something else and made it used for something more relevant today. So, for example, when this building was first built, it was the largest grain storage warehouse in the United States. They would take grain from this building and they would put it on ships that would go out to different areas of the Great Lakes. Now it's just beautiful office buildings. Companies such as Encyclopedia Britannica is inside there. All right, now go ahead and look up the left side of the boat. You're going to see another building that combines the old with the new, but this time literally. This is the Builders Building. Now, the left part of the Builders Building was completed in 1926. Again, top, bottom, in between the windows. You're going to see that neoclassic style of architecture again, the ornamentation, the column shapes. Now, the right part of the building was added in 1984. This is what we call a postmodern style. Neither right angle, less ornamentation. The architects wanted to show you how architecture has changed over the course of the years. Now, as you come underneath this bridge, go ahead and look off to the right side of the boat. You are going to see Chicago's largest, I repeat, Chicago's largest office building. This is the Merchandise Mart with over 4 million square feet of usable office space on the inside of it. Now, technically, the Sears Tower does have more square footage inside of it, but a lot of it's taken up by elevator shafts and machinery. So in terms of usable office space, it's the largest office building in the city. In fact, it's the second largest office building in the country, only second to the Pentagon in Washington, or I should say Virginia, actually. This building was the first building in the country to receive its own zip code. For a number of years, it was the largest overall building in the world. And those busts that you see, those heads, are busts of famous retail merchants. And in just a moment, I'm going to explain to you why that's relevant. Look at her; she's double-fisted. That's the kind of passenger I like on board. All right, now go ahead and look out the left side of the boat. You'll see one of my favorite buildings on the tour. This is 333 Wacker. Now, this is a great example of something that we call contextual architecture. Now, what contextual architecture very simply means is that it blends in with its surroundings. So notice how the building is curving. It's mimicking the bend of the river. Notice how the windows of the building are tinted green. It's mimicking the color of the river. Now, I don't know why the architects want to draw attention to the fact that a river is green, because that means it's extremely polluted, but they decided to do it anyways. Also, notice on the bottom right there, you got concrete and granite instead of glasses because the train goes right by it. Nobody wants to noise the office by the train, right? So they put your furnaces, air conditioners, all that stuff on the bottom. This way you quiet office space up top. Anybody on board a fan of the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off? You all should be. That would be awesome. That's where his dad's office was right there, remember? Now, in your tour guide's opinion, second greatest Chicago movie ever made. Number one is, of course, The Blues Brothers. It's not like a stereotype that all Chicagoans love Blues Brothers. It's true, we do. My dad was, he's a retired cop now, but he was a Chicago police officer for 41 years. And when I filmed the movie, he was actually an extra in it. Now, you can't notice him because they paused the scene. There's like 300 cops. He's like, oh, I was in that scene right there. Well, yeah, when you're born in Chicago, you're kind of raised on that movie. All right, go ahead and look out the left side of the boat. You're going to see this giant building once more, the merchandise mart. Let me tell you a little story about that building. So Marshall Field spent $38 million of his own money building that building. Now, most of you may not know this, but the department store originated in Chicago. And the purpose of this building is Marshall Field envisioned, say you ran a department store in San Francisco, say you ran a department store in New York City. You come to Chicago once a year, you pick out everything that you were going to sell in the building for the entire year under one roof. Small problem with this building. Construction was completed in the year 1930. Stock markets crashed at the end of the year 1929. United States of America, well on its way into the Great Depression. Not a great time to open the largest building in the world like it was at the time. So they had to cut their losses, and they had to sell the building in the year 1940. They sold to a very famous man by the name of Joseph Kennedy. He was father of President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy family owned this, they bought it for $13 million, I don't know if I mentioned that. Kennedy owned this building up until, the Kennedys owned the building up until 1997 when they finally sold it. So I mentioned Marshall Field spent about $38 million building it. Joseph Kennedy bought it for around $13 million in 1940. When the Kennedy family sold this building in 1997, they sold it for over $500 million. I think that's what you call a good return on your investment.
C'était construit pour 30 millions. Ils ont acheté pour 13 millions et en 1913.
All right, everyone. People got the left side of the boat. This tall building right here is 300 North LaSalle. This is the world's tallest LEED certified building at the platinum level. What's a LEED certified building? It's an extremely energy efficient building. So, for example, one of the things that it does is it uses river water in its heating and cooling system right from the river here. Not something new. Buildings have been doing that for years. But it filters the water out. They say pretty close, almost drinking quality. They put it back into the river. So this building is actually kind of helping filter our river out. If anybody likes steakhouses, you got Chicago has some of the best steakhouses in the world. That Chicago cut's one of my favorites. Very expensive, but I would highly recommend it. They specialize in bone-in cuts. Oh, really good. All right, now I want to talk about an architect. You can't see his building just yet, but in my opinion, he's my favorite architect, and in my opinion, he's the most important architect that ever lived. And I don't think you fully appreciate him until you know the significance of his architecture and what he did for architecture. I want to talk about a gentleman by the name of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Now, Mies van der Rohe was born in Germany. He was part of this great architectural school called the Bauhaus. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that. However, the Nazis thought it was too radical, and they shut it down in 1938. A lot of these great architects came to the city of Chicago because even back then, they were the architectural capital of the world. Now, Mies van der Rohe was the father of a movement of architecture that we call modernism, more specifically of mid-century modernism. So what is modernism? Well, to understand it, you kind of got to go back a little bit. So if you were to look at skyscrapers dating from, let's say, 1890 to about, let's say, 1930, they would share one thing in common. The high majority, I mean about 90% of them, would incorporate some kind of element of ancient, Greek or Roman, the neoclassic style, ancient Gothic, ancient Egyptian. Now, this did not sit well with a lot of people because the way it felt about it was that we weren't highlighting our own accomplishments. We had to borrow from past cultures and make our architecture. Now, Mies van der Rohe was doing this thing since the 1920s, but he became very popular in Chicago after World War II when America was looking for a new identity. So what is modernism? Best way for me to describe it to you is by telling you Mies van der Rohe's most famous quote, and that is, less is more. What did he mean by that? Why put ornamentation on your building? Just let the materials that you build with be what makes the building beautiful all by itself. Let the glass, let the steel speak for the architecture. He followed that concept done by an earlier architect here in Chicago, Louis Sullivan, that form should follow function. Meaning, don't put all this extra, concrete. Make your building functional. Now, the last building Mies van der Rohe ever designed, you look up the left side of the boat, you see this tall, plain black building. You will never see a better example of modernism because he's the father of that. Now, we think floor-to-ceiling glass windows, you think California. Well, believe it or not, they became popular in Chicago first with Mies van der Rohe. The inside of the building's wide open spaces with floor-to-ceiling glass windows so you can organically interact with the outside world. Neat right angles, void of ornamentation. It's one of the most efficiently designed buildings you can. This building was completed in 1973, and you could have completed in 1993. The insides are so easily remodeled. Now, I know you look at this building and you say, why did this guy just spend so much time talking about a boring black building? I've seen a ton that look like them. The reason why is till this very day, Mies van der Rohe is changing architecture. Let me give you a great example. Look off the left side of the boat, you're going to see Chicago's second tallest building, third tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, the 12th tallest building in the world. Our International Trump Tower at 1,362 feet tall. Now, what makes this building so beautiful? Glass and steel. Very modernist, very Miesian influence. Now, this was designed by probably the world's most famous architect right now, I would say, Adrian Smith. He's designed 6 buildings as the the Kingdom Tower, which is being built in Saudi Arabia, which is going to be 1 kilometer tall. And he's a Chicago native, all built here in, all designed here in the city of Chicago. But this is my favorite skyscraper in the entire world, actually. It was completed in the year 2009. There's some things that are pretty obvious that I don't like about the building. It's really great that Sugar style. Adrian Smith, it's very, it was paying tribute to Mies van der Rohe when he made that design right there. All right, now coming underneath this bridge, go ahead and look up the left side of the boat. You're going to see what most Chicagoans call the most beautiful building in the city of Chicago. You are going to see our Tribune Tower. When you look on the side of the boat, which is an Art Deco building, but it's also what we call a Neo-Gothic building. Because you look at the top flying buttresses, detailed stonework, kind of like you would see in a cathedral in Europe. Now, if you get the chance to after this boat ride, go walk around that building. Detailed stonework on it is unmatched by any skyscraper you'll ever see. Completed in 1924, Chicago should be used as one of the major tenants inside that building. So keep looking off the left side of the boat, and you're going to see this tall building with a NBC plaque on the top of it that looks like it has pinstripes running down the side. That right there is Chicago's famous NBC Tower. Now, this is a style of architecture that we nicknamed Eco Deco. The reason for that, the Art Deco era was the between World War I and World War II. This building was completed in 1989, so it echoes the Art Deco era. Now, what makes a building Art Deco? Very simply, verticality, lines that go up and down. So look at how the windows are pushed back just a little bit. It's got lines in between them that go to the top and the bottom. No ornamentation blocking that sort of straight line. So it's sort of a trick to make you pay attention to how tall the building is. Now, this building right here, obviously the building we've seen so far is face the river, but not that one. That's a little weird, right? Adrian Smith, same guy that did the Trump, designed that building right there. He thought the most beautiful example of Art Deco ever designed was a Tribune Tower. He built the NBC Tower facing it to pay tribute to it. That's another reason I like Adrian Smith, because everybody can turn your heads. I apologize to people on the bow. You see how there's that setback on Trump? Adrian Smith refused to design a building there that would block Mies van der Rohe's building, which is why you have that setback. So I just like Adrian Smith because, when you're a great architect, you don't have to be humble. Yeah, I like that. All right, off the left side of the boat, you're going to see Chicago's famous Sheraton Hotel. I want you to look at the top 3 floors of the Sheraton Hotel around as long as the rest of the building. Those are the presidential suites. Now, I know no matter what hotel you go to, they want to tell you they have presidential suites. You go to a Motel 6 and they might tell you that. That's just the room they're going to change your sheets in. Any world leader, any president, anybody of importance comes to stay in Chicago, they stay in the top 3 floors of that hotel. The top 3 floors have 9-inch thick bulletproof glass on the windows. That building's known for security measures. You can land a helicopter up there if you have to. During the 1996 Democratic Convention hosted here in the city of Chicago, President Bill Clinton had his entire stay in that hotel. I couldn't tell you who he stayed with, but that's where he stayed. Now, there's only one president when he visits the city of Chicago that doesn't stay in that hotel. Anyone want to take a guess who that is? Yes, Barack Obama. He's got his own house on the south side in the Kennedy. Use your imagination for this one. I want you to pretend like you're going down this river, but it's the late 1800s, almost the year 1900. Man, oh man, would this river have been nasty? When I say nasty, I mean flat out disgusting. In a poem entitled Chicago, written by the poet Carl Sandburg, he referred to Chicago as hog butcher to the world. The reason for this is that at one point in Chicago's history, we had the largest stockyards in the world located down the south branch of our river, where we would slaughter thousands of pigs and then thousands of cows every single day. And what do you think we do with all the parts of the animal we're going to use? Do it right here in the river. Waste management sewer systems not really well thought out back then, so where the wastewater ended up? Right here. Now the river flowed east towards Lake Michigan. Small problem with this. We get all of our drinking water from Lake Michigan. So we are polluting our own drinking water with our own river. Not very smart of us because people are dying of things like typhoid fever and all kinds of gross diseases. Same thing you were doing in the restroom with this. Right there in Boston. Here in Chicago, we nickname it the first case of Chicago. So how do you think we solve this problem? You think our city council gets together and goes, you know what? Let's stop putting stuff into the river because it's bad for the environment. Oh, no. It's the late 1800s, almost in the 1900s. People don't think like that. So how do we solve that problem? Well, we did it in a very good old-fashioned way. We simply made it somebody else's problem, and we reversed the flow of the Chicago River. So to this very day, the river now flows away from Lake Michigan. How did we do this? Easy to explain. We dug a deep canal. The Chicago River is not a very deep river. It's about 25 feet deep on average, and most of that was dredged out to make it that deep. So we built a canal which is deeper than the Chicago River, connected to the south branch. That water from the river flows into that deep canal and away from Lake Michigan. Get a little bit more complex into the explanation. For any of you who are familiar with how continental divides and watershed works, most people think there's one continental divide in the United States, the Great Divide. It's not true. There's actually a bunch all over the place. And one of them actually runs through the west side of Chicago. So the continental divide is the way the urban actually slopes. So basically when it rains, it's still it's going to be east side right like Michigan. And west it actually goes up to the Mississippi River. Now the divide, as you can imagine, Chicago is a very flat city, so it's not very steep. So what this canal does is it makes the Chicago River part of the Mississippi watershed. So that being said, this canal connects the Chicago River to the Des Plaines River. The Des Plaines River is connected to the Illinois River. The Illinois River is connected to the Mississippi, and the Mississippi River empties out to the Gulf of Mexico. So being the very nice Chicago and DR, we gave all that dirty, gross water to cities like New Orleans and St. Louis. Now, St. Louis in particular, not very happy about the idea of all this gross Chicago water going by them in the Mississippi, because they basically took their water from the Mississippi. And they convinced a federal judge to sign an order that said Chicago had to halt the construction on our canal until further research could be done on how safe the water was going to be by the time it reached St. Louis. Keep in mind, this is the year 1900. Something like that could take years. Now, Chicago had most of the canal dug out already, so the night before the judge was going to sign this order, Chicago went out in the middle of the night, dynamited to open the rest of the canal. So St. Louis wakes up in the morning, Chicago's river's reversed, and there was absolutely nothing St. Louis could do about it. Now, this made St. Louis very angry with the city of Chicago, but I'm the kind of guy that thinks you need to give credit where credit's due, because St. Louis definitely had the revenge on us. They said, fine, you know what, Chicago? If we have to drink all this gross water, so do you. So what happened was, when this water started going by the city of St. Louis, what they did was they took it out of the Mississippi, they put it inside these little bottles, and then they shipped them up to Chicago, and the labels on the side of them read, Budweiser. Kind of true when you think about it. Now, I'm picking on poor St. Louis. Part of that, I didn't make anything up about us dynamiting the canal in the middle of the night, but it wasn't just St. Louis who tried to convince this judge. It was a whole collection of cities, such as Peoria, Joliet, all these cities that are going to eventually be downstream from Chicago if this canal opened. But we did do it in the middle of the night. I'm not even that part up. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to let you just hang out for a second. Right now, what we're going to do is we're waiting to get inside the Chicago lock. Once we're in the lock, we have to secure a line up against the side of the lock wall. So what I'll do is I will put the microphone down, make sure that happens. But we're in the lock. I'm going to explain what it is, why we're there, all that good stuff. So sit back, relax. Great photo opportunities right here, and also an awesome opportunity to go downstairs and get yourself a drink from the bar.
Yeah. Don't touch it, don't touch it.
Ok.
Don't touch it, je peux touch it.
Ce niveau est comment par rapport à au lac?
Le lac est plus bas ou...
On les regarde,